Hello, my name is Mr. Wesley Scott. I'm a research student within the School of Art and Design at Coventry University in the UK. And this presentation is about my work entitled Understanding How Designers Work with the Users That Have Specific Critical Additional Needs. During this work, I have been supported in a supervisory role by Professor Andre Woodcock and Dr. Dina McDonough. In this presentation, I will give an introduction to the work, I will outline the knowledge gap, I will discuss the aims and objectives, I will explain and outline the methodology, I will introduce my results and discuss them, and then that should take us nicely on to talking about the future directions of the project. Okay, so this presentation provides a summary of the first stage of a three-stage project which seeks to understand the barriers designers face when working with users that have specific critical additional needs, in the hope that we can produce guidelines to assist those designers to make reasoned methodological choices when working with SCAN users. But before I go any further, I must explain and outline what the term SCAN means. SCAN refers to individuals that have needs that are specific to them, but they are critical as well. For example, if an individual requires help to feed themselves in order to eat, then the critical additional need would be the need to be fed. The knowledge gap. This was interesting. Whilst I acknowledge that the work I'm doing has strong links with and in some ways overlaps with that done by the iDesign Free research team and the work of Helen Hamlin and Loughborough and Cambridge universities. This work only goes so far. And whilst it makes a relevant contribution, it does not provide guidelines for designers in the selection of methods. It simply outlines the methods that can be used in an inclusive design project. The aim of this project then is to produce guidelines to aid designers to make reasoned methodological choices when working with SCAN participants at all stages of the design process. The objectives of this part of the study were to investigate designers' experiences of working with SCAN users. It was also to investigate how SCAN users and their carers are treated by the designers in the design process, with the third and final objective being to identify key themes and recommendations that will form the basis of guidelines to be produced. In terms of my methodology, I employed focus group and Skype conversations. As you can see, there's an image on the slide of one of the focus groups in progress. The reasons why the focus group was employed is that it enabled designers to present their findings in a non-threatening, comfortable manner. It also facilitated knowledge exchange as stated by Kuhn. The focus groups lasted between 45 and 90 minutes, and there was a range of themes discussed as outlined on the slide. In total, 15 participants took part, 4 of which were control participants, so they had no experience of working with SCAN users. Then 2 focus groups were conducted, comprising of 1 of 4 and 1 of 3 participants. Now, these participants had worked with SCAN users before. They had experience of it. And 6 of them were male and 1 of them was female. In addition, some of the participants chose to take part by means of a Skype conversation, which meant that they didn't have to travel to a focus group, which saved them for time, and it didn't also matter if they were in a different country, which I will go on to talk about later. There were some US designers, 2 female US designers, who took part, and there was a significant difference in culture and practice, which we'll go on to talk about later. In terms of analysis, a thematic analysis was conducted. The purpose of this was to enable me to really get in the data and get behind the data and immerse myself in that data, and it helps me to pick out relevant themes. Again, going back to the difference I highlighted earlier, there was one significant difference between US and UK designers, and that was, on the whole, US designers were more inclined to work with users in a co-design relationship, whereas that was less so with the UK designers. A lot of the UK designers said things like user enrollment is poor, if I'm being honest. Now, the reason for this difference is somewhat unclear. It could be US culture, or it could be the way, just the culture of the person. I say it could be US culture because if you look at it, the Americans with Disabilities Act came into force in 1990 in the US of A, whereas in the UK we didn't receive legislation on the statute books until 1995. But like I say, the reason for this difference is really unclear. Moving on to results. Now, these are quite neatly presented. They come under 6 distinct themes. The first of which is the most popular that we found was use of intermediaries. 87% either used intermediaries or other stakeholders as well as or in place of the end user. Now, we're going to talk about some of the problems with that approach and the advantages of that approach later. But for now, we'll leave it at that. Number 2 was the nature of working with SCAN participants. Over half the sample commented that the ability to empathise, so that's the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, is a good skill to have when working with SCAN participants. Ethical issues was also highlighted. Now, this was perhaps not surprising to me because as a researcher I'm acutely aware of the ethical issues of working with SCAN users, and it was particularly heartening to see designers asking for help and saying, well, we're not really sure of what they are. We know they exist, but we're not really sure of what they are. And it was also further heartening to see the fact that designers felt that this guidance should be tailored to all young designers, as they may not have the same level of experience as their older colleagues. Maintaining professional boundaries was also highlighted as an important point by a significant minority in the sample. They said things like, remember your professional boundaries, don't give out personal telephone numbers, because sometimes people can think that if you help them with one thing, you can help them with a multitude of things, and that's not the case. And it's also important to remember that these SCAN users are vulnerable, so you do have to watch yourself when you work with such users, and you have to maintain good professional boundaries. So it was good to see that piece of advice, and that the knowledge that they knew they had to do that, it was really good to see that happening in the research. Also, one that perhaps isn't quite as surprising is the use of language. In the social model of disability, there are some. There is one element of it which deals with use of language and how language is used, and what is proper, as it were, and here the designers acknowledge that in some circles you may be able to get away with saying carer or caregiver, whereas in some circles you'd find yourself in trouble for that, as one of the participants said. Engaging with users. Now this is the key part of the work, really, and to demonstrate my results, I've used Arnstein's ladder. Now, Arnstein was a psychologist who in 1969 conducted some research, and as a result of the research she produced this ladder to illustrate how the various ways users can be involved, going from citizen control, rung 8 of the ladder, right down to manipulation, where they have no control over. And it was perhaps disappointing, but not perhaps surprising to see that most designers use methods between rungs 1 and 4. 73%, in fact, use methods between rungs 1 and 4, and only the remaining 27% use methods between sort of rungs 4 and 7, and they were like I say, it was mainly the US designers, although there were the 2 male Skype interviews that did also make use of those extra methods between rungs 4 and 7. As for format of the guidelines, there were 6 formats suggested in total, and it was the designers felt that the format of any guidelines would need to be incredibly visual, because designers are visual people. As you can see, they range from an interactive website to workshops, DVDs, Facebook and LinkedIn. So there's a whole myriad of reasons as to why they've been chosen and why people wanted them. And as you can see, the most popular is a website, so we will probably be producing a website, but also we will probably produce guidelines in a variety of different formats so they're accessible to the widest possible population. It was perhaps a bit disheartening to see that there's very little published literature in the field of my research, and it's even more surprising because Roberts and Fowles comment in their 2005 paper that that legislation and good design practice will hopefully make designers consider the need to use accessible methods. Also, given that often scan users need a high level of engagement and need a lot of support to present their own views in research, it's not perhaps surprising that ISO TR suggests exactly that you need to use a lot of methods that involve a high level of contact with the end user when working with scan users. This is from both the designers that have worked with scan users and the designers that have not worked with scan users. They stated, like I've said in previous slides, that a lot of them used intermediaries. Now, there are advantages to that approach, there are disadvantages to that approach. Certainly Cognos says it's a recognised approach. It's a recognised approach when working with such users, but Blow and Concannon contend that there are problems, mainly down to the fact that communication is a two-way process, and when you put a third person into that, it becomes a three-way process, and we've got to be very careful as researchers and as designers not to taint the intermediary, not to taint their views with the views of the scan user and vice versa. So we must be clear that what we're actually receiving is directly from the scan user. It was also surprising to note that there was no clear evidence to say that if you had more experience, you would use better methods. And like we say, the research does definitely point to the fact that there needs to be more information on methods produced, but some designers do comment that it can be difficult to involve users based on the type of products they design, etc. Also, due to the high level of intermediaries, use of intermediaries, as already discussed, it is now felt there is a need to modify the research slightly to include both scan users and carers. It was also heartening to see that designers acknowledge that just because you have a disability doesn't automatically mean you should accept the first thing that's given to you. And this will become an ever more important factor, especially due to the fact that in 2008, so these figures are a bit out of date now, but they're what I could find, that the disability equipment market was worth £1.6 billion and will continue to grow. So based on all these conclusions, it is clear that the research points to a need for this work, to a gap for this work to fill, if you will. These are conclusions from the control group. Surprisingly, the control group made use of a wider variety of methods, and they also felt that the use of intermediaries and carers could confirm and validate what somebody had been telling them. They also felt that design designed for non-scan users rather, was easier because it was a more functional brief and there was less variation in requirements. However, when questioned, the non-scan designers did say that there wouldn't be a problem if they were asked to work with scan participants, and they would not change their practice. Now that can either be taken two ways. As a positive, that they would still want to work with the designers, or as a negative, that they may exclude people from their research through not adapting. Future work. Now, over the next stages of the project, we hope to interview scan users to get them the chance to give their side, their opinions. Just like we've done in this stage, we will give them the designers the chance to give their opinions. We hope to be able to give the scan users, their chance to give their opinion, and their carers as well, like I've said, because it's important that we get feedback from the carers too. This will be done using interviews, using one-to-one interviews. It is expected that we'll at least interview 20 scan users, that's users with specific critical additional needs, and their carers. It's accepted that we also might have to broaden our search for scan users as well, to scan users that have not only been involved in a design process, but may have been involved in a design process for their social care package, for example. We're also going to, due to the high level of intermediaries, we are also going to look at using interviewing carers to get their side of the story, really. And then from that, the information and the research from those two stages will be combined together to produce guidelines that will then be sent out to a panel of expert users and designers to be validated to ensure that they're effective and efficient for what they need to do. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me on the below email address.